What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Dylan Talks Tone. Today we're going to talk about 5 things that you may or may not know about Telecaster pickups. The thumbnail says 5 things you probably don't know, or 5 things you don't know, or whatever. But many of you may know some of this stuff, but I wanted to kind of put it all into one kind of composite package because some of the myths surrounding Telecaster pickups and some of the, this is where the tone comes from kind of stuff is a little bit misplaced. And so I was thinking of putting it all into a video so you can kind of get a good picture of why a Telecaster pickup set is what it is. Okay? So before we get to that, I want to thank my Patreon supporters for helping me and supporting the channel, patreon.com/DylanTalksTone. Also, what we really do is we make pickups. So you can get these Telecaster pickups at DylanTalksTone.com. In fact, some of the custom stuff I'm going to show you in a minute, you can get there as well. So yeah, since we don't have sponsors for the channel, I just figured I'd let you know about that. Okay, so let's get right into 5 things you may or may not know about Telecaster pickups. The first thing is this pickup right here, the first one to ever exist in a Fender Telecaster, was not actually a Fender Telecaster pickup. It was a bridge pickup from a Fender Champion lap steel guitar. And that fact comes in more important as we talk about the other things about this Telecaster pickup as we get through the conversation. That's why I want to kind of put all of this together. It was basically sort of a retrofitted thing. In fact, up until very recently, in the last few years, it's gotten out of the realm, but it was a cheap way to get a vintage Telecaster bridge pickup, was to buy one of those Champion bridge pickups and then put a bass plate on it and stick it into a Telecaster, and you'd have like a vintage Tele pickup for a lot less money than a regular vintage Tele pickup. I think people have caught on to that. Those guitars have gotten a lot more valuable, and now it's kind of not a thing anymore. Like, it's not an advantage. I think they're going for $800 or $1,000 at the time I'm making this video. So, there's really no benefit to it. But that's how it started out. Number 2, most Telecaster pickups these days are made with 42 gauge wire. Okay, so we've got this. In fact, I just wound this one this morning for this video. This is 42 gauge wire. We'll get into wire types in a minute, but they actually started out as 43. And the reason for that was in a pedal or a lap steel guitar, it would make sense because the compression would be different. The highs would be subdued a little bit differently, etc., etc. But you didn't really need that in a guitar for number 1 reason. And number 2, with the advent of the neck pickup, then we had to sort of compensate and kind of make everything work. So the reason that's the case is because, of course, there was only a bridge pickup at first. They developed a neck pickup. In fact, this guitar right here is the very first known Fender Telecaster to have a neck pickup prototype in it. This is a guitar that I was able to handle a few years ago. And also, side note, see how it's all a weird color? It was also like a test mule for paint colors, and so that's why it's all these weird various colors. But the reason we went from 43 gauge to 42 gauge wire on the bridge pickup is because the smaller neck pickup size required that we had to go with 43 gauge to get enough winds on there, so moving the bridge pickup to 42 to get the balance we wanted. Let me show you. So when we start talking about the necessity for a smaller diameter wire, it's because these are a couple of custom ones that we've cut, but basically this is, first of all, the neck pickup spacing is a lot narrower. You see that? It's a lot narrower than the bridge pickup. So that's one thing. So this is the top plate of a bridge pickup, and this is the top plate, this is a custom Lexan one, of the neck pickup. So you'll see that, first of all, the spacing is a lot smaller, But the biggest thing is you'll see that there is a lot less space. This is a mother of pearl one that we made. There's a lot less space for the wire to fit. So therefore, in order for them to get everything underneath this cover and get the string spacing that they wanted, they had to go with a finer wire, a smaller wire diameter. So this is 43. Well, the trick is that once you change this, then you kind of need to retune this bridge pickup so that they balance correctly. One of the things that people have a hard time with Tele pickups is that balance between neck and bridge. It's not very good. And that's one of the things we really focus on here, is making sure that we get good clarity out of our neck pickup, because a lot of neck pickups are super muddy. And I don't like that. I don't like muddy tone in anything. So we focus a lot on that. Another way you can do that is you can actually ditch the cover altogether. We've got a bunch of these custom ones where we've done this with the outside. That's like a translucent sort of tortoiseshell stripe looking stuff. Anyway, but that has no cover on it. The cover, people will argue this, the cover does make a difference. Does it mean that a pickup with a cover sounds bad? No, as long as you do your pickup wind and everything correctly. We've worked really hard at Dylan Talks Tone to make sure that our normal flat 6 neck Tele pickup has a lot of clarity. If you listen to the demo on the website, you'll hear that. It's not muddy at all. Now that being said, if we wanted to go this way, you'll hear a whole lot less difference with our pickups because we don't have that muddiness to start with. But that's sort of a thing that people talk about a lot, right? Is the balance between the neck and the bridge and the muddiness or not muddiness of the neck pickup. The reason the pickups were made a little bit muddy in the first place is you have to remember that there were no electric basses when these guitars came out. And so the Telecaster, actually the original Telecaster circuit, had a bass circuit in it, and this was the bass pickup. That's why they used to call them the bass pickup and the treble pickup, because this was your bass line. If you listen to very early music with Telecasters, they were using the neck pickup as a bass. Therefore, we kind of had to, in the 2020s, sort of engineer clarity back into this so that we could get a tone that we use these days. All right, number 3 would be there are rare versions of heavy formvar Telecaster pickups, particularly on the bridge. Heavy formvar is a particular kind of coating that goes on the wire. So you may not know this about pickup wire. A lot of people are surprised to find out, especially for those of you that are new to this, that there's actually insulation on this very fine wire. The pickup would short out if it didn't have that insulation on it. So there's insulation on here. It's a very, very thin insulation, obviously. And there are a couple of different wire types of insulation. In modern terms, it's called single build and double build. But in the old days, there was plain enamel and heavy formvar. They were different chemical compositions of the actual liquid that they would put on there. That's how they do it. It's a liquid that gets like brushed on. But then there was also or rolled on. There was also a thickness to it too. So heavy formvar is more or less twice as thick as the insulation that is on a plain enamel, so which is a single build wire. The thing is that also if you take your insulation thickness and you double it, that would also make the room that it takes on the bobbin and make it less, like it would actually fill up the bobbin more. Tonally, what that does is it moves technically what that does is it moves the center cores of the wires further apart from each other, and it changes the inductance of the pickup because the wires aren't as close together, making the inductance of the coil act differently. In 2024, the type of insulation, like the chemical composition of it, is a lot less important. Basically, science dictates that there are some parameters that need to be followed, but Polynylon is the common thing that's used these days, but you still can get it in single build and double build. So you can still create that heavy formvar versus plain enamel sort of situation. And it sounds just like a vintage pickup if you do it right. Here at Dylan Talks Tone, our flat 6 pickups are modeled after a middle 60s, like a 66 transition Telecaster. And these were made with plain enamel wire back in the day. We use single build poly because availability, because there's a lot of myths around this. I could do a whole video just on this, but basically there's no reason to use plain enamel wire anymore. And in fact, for those of you that are like vintage junkies, you may or may not know that plain enamel is not even made the way it used to be made because they had to ban a bunch of chemicals in it that give people cancer. So it's not even the same anyway. So there's no point in doing like plain enamel for the sake of using plain enamel anymore. We can get it in a different color if you want so that it looks like it, so that it's vintage looking, but there's really no point in doing it for the tone because we can get the same thing with this. Okay, number 4 is a big one. Obviously at the beginning of this video, if you'll remember that we talked about how this used to be a Champion lap steel pickup. Here's an interesting thing. If you go back and look at this picture, you'll notice something about this pickup. It is screwed in to the body of the guitar. Okay? It is not suspended like we know in a Telecaster. This is suspended by these 3 screws in the bridge. There was no way to thread screws into the pickup because the holes were too big, because they were used more or less as a through hole straight into the body. To adapt to this, there was a metal plate that was placed on the bottom of the pickup so that the screws could now suspend the pickup in the bridge. This was originally not done for quote-unquote tones. It was actually done for a logistic purpose of making sure that this would mount in the guitar. Of course, the adaptation changed, etc., and things, obviously we'll get into this in just a second, but basically nowadays this has become part of what we use to make the Telecaster tone, but in the beginning it was purely like a logistical function of this plate. It was not added for the tones. Let's get into this here bass plate, number 5. You may or may not know this, because this is not copper. This is steel. It has to be steel. Let me show you why. Okay, so this is the mounting plate that we are used to seeing on the bottom of a Telecaster pickup. So when you make a Telecaster pickup, it looks like this at first, and then this little guy goes on the bottom of here, and the screws go through there, and that's how it mounts to the bridge, right? That's the traditional way of making a Telecaster bridge pickup. That's what we're sort of used to. A lot of folks will say, no, that's copper. It's copper plated, okay? There were 2 different ways of doing this. In fact, in the 50s, I believe it's in the 50s, they were nickel plated. In fact, for a long time, we used nickel plated pickups, or nickel plated base plates here too. And the only reason, let's get this straight right now. The only reason, and just to prove this, okay, this is steel. The only reason this was copper plated or nickel plated was for corrosion resistance. That was really the only reason. It was not done for a tonal thing. It was not done for any other reason except for we needed to have a sturdy way to mount this to the bottom of a pickup. This is not magnetized yet, that's why it's not sticking. Mounted to the bottom of a pickup so that the screw holes would then sandwich the pickup in between, and it would be then mounted to the bridge of a Telecaster. That's what it's for. What's really interesting about this now is it does, though, change the tone of the pickup. Okay, so what happens is, because we have this steel base plate, instead of our field of magnetism being just kind of like a football shaped, more or less, we'll call it that for the sake of this conversation, around this, basically what happens is when we put steel on the bottom of here, it makes this a lot fatter. So what happens is it turns this into like this wedge shape, which changes where the inductance happens in the coil. Therefore, I don't want to say strengthens the magnetic field, but what it does do is it makes the magnetic field stronger in different parts of the coil than if you were to not have that base plate on the bottom, because then it would kind of go back to the shape of a football and it would be a little bit less down here at the bottom. That's why it changes the tone. That's really the basis of the Telecaster bridge pickup tone, is this plate. Now, what if this was actual copper? Well, first of all, it wouldn't stay on the bottom because it would strip out. It would not be a durable way to mount the pickup to the guitar. Second of all, copper, if it were solid copper or brass or anything else, it would introduce unwanted eddy currents. And so basically what that means is that you would have, with any metal piece, well, there are certain ones in particular, copper is probably about the worst for this application anyway, that will create basically like these little, they call them eddy currents, but it's basically like a little interference in the magnetic field down here at the bottom where the magnet is perpendicular to the plate. And so as a result of that, if this were actually fully copper, it would cause that to happen. Because it's a thin plating, it doesn't do it as much, but because it is a steel plate, that's where we get the sound that we get. So it's possible that what you heard here, you may have known already. You may have known some of this stuff, you may have known all of it, and you may have some details that you would like to add. I'm sure that there will be Fender nerd historians who think they know something different than what I know, which I'm sure is the truth, but right, there's all kinds of this stuff been flying around for 70 years of the Telecaster. However, from the technical side of it, it's helpful to see all of this together, because a lot of times, like I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of the myths and everything that we hear about what makes Telecasters sound like Telecasters is not based on kind of the full picture of what this guitar ended up being. So we all say that we want super vintage stuff. However, the guitar has been an evolution to what we have now. Like what we want in a neck pickup is different than what they wanted in a neck pickup when this guitar first came out. So allowing that evolution to happen, understanding that the wires have changed, materials have changed a little bit, and we can still get a very good vintage sound, but more usable out of modern materials, is something that we like to do here at Dylan Talks Tone. That's why we call kind of the tagline of Dylan Talks Tone is the new vintage, because that's what I'm very passionate about here. So there you go. Some things you may or may not have known about Telecaster pickups. You can get yours at dylantalkstone.com. All this custom stuff's pretty cool. You can actually get custom Telecaster covers. You can get magnets. You can get your own flat work. If you're a guitar builder and you need custom flat work for your brand of pickups, we can do that as well. Base plates, all that kind of stuff. We like Teles around here. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you in the next video.